The church was quiet. Too quiet, even. Candles flickered beside the large white coffin at the front of the altar. Golden letters on the casket spelled the name David O. Johnson, a billionaire, a genius, a son, a brother, a man whose life had risen from the ashes only to be lost too soon. Guests filled the pews, but most weren't crying. Some were whispering, some were smirking, some were already calculating. One of them was Mr. Emeka, David's stepfather, sitting in the front row beside his wife, Elizabeth. His eyes weren't red. His voice wasn't weak. In fact, he leaned over to whisper to his son John, "Now that he's gone, I hope that lawyer signs those papers quickly. We don't have all day." John chuckled quietly, his suit crisp, his phone buzzing with messages. Judith, David's younger sister, scrolled through her Instagram, already typing. "Gone too soon, but your houses and cars won't be forgotten. Big bro forever." None of them saw the man behind the curtain. None of them knew the pastor giving the eulogy was fake. None of them knew that David was still alive. Inside the coffin, David's heart raced. He heard everything, every word, every lie, every laugh. His fists clenched inside the satin-lined casket. So this was how they felt. This was how they loved me. His mother said nothing all through the ceremony. Her eyes remained blank, as if unsure if she should cry or pretend. She looked neither broken nor proud. The fake pastor began to pray loudly. That was the cue. Suddenly, bang! The coffin lid flung open. Screams filled the church. Judith fainted. John tripped over a chair. Mr. Emeka stood up and stumbled back in horror, shouting, "Jesus! Blood of Jesus!" David sat up slowly, his face cold, his eyes locked on each person in the room. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He stepped out of the coffin in his black suit, stared at his shocked mourners, and spoke the words that silenced the room. "So this is what you really think of me? A body to bury? And a bank account to fight over?" Elizabeth gasped. Mr. Emeka froze. Nobody dared speak. Years before the funeral, David was just 10 when everything changed. His real father had died after a long sickness. David remembered how his dad used to call him Champ. He would lift him on his shoulders and say, "One day, you'll be great, my boy. One day, the world will know your name." But that day never came. His mother, Elizabeth, remarried barely a year after. The man's name was Mr. Emeka, a tall, stern man, with a voice like thunder and eyes that rarely smiled. From the first day, David noticed something. Mr. Emeka didn't like him. He would yell at him for tiny mistakes, slam the door when David was around. Sometimes he'd just stare at the boy and mutter under his breath, "You remind me of that man, that useless man." Elizabeth tried to keep peace, but peace came with silence. She never defended David, never asked questions, never stood up when Emeka gave David the smallest portion of food or made him sleep outside when he got a B instead of an A. Soon, she gave birth to Judith and John. David loved them instantly. He thought, "Now I'll have people to play with, a real family." But Emeka made sure that never happened. While Judith and John got new school shoes, David wore torn sandals. When they sat to eat, David cleaned their plates after them. When they rode in the car to school, David stayed behind to sweep, wash, and then walk 3 miles on foot. Still, he never complained. He just dreamed of a better life, dreamed of a family that loved him, dreamed of escaping. One day, when he was 18, Emeka called him to the living room and said, "You're done with secondary school. That's enough. You're not going to university on my money." David looked at his mother. She avoided his eyes. That night, he packed a small bag. Inside it were 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, and a file with his school certificate. His wallet held 5-0. "I'm going to Lagos," he told his mother. "I need to chase something better than this." Elizabeth tried to stop him, gently, but there was no force in her hands. Deep down, she knew maybe this was the only way to stop the tension in the house. Lagos, the city that never sleeps. The city was fast, hot, crowded, but David didn't mind. He had fire in his bones. He slept under the Oshodi Bridge for the first few weeks, woke up early, bathed at a public tap, wore the best of his 3 shirts, and went out job hunting. Most days, they chased him away. But one afternoon, he entered a clean, shiny building called WeTech Global. He walked up to the receptionist and said, "Please, I can do anything. I just want to work." The woman was about to dismiss him when a man walked by. Tall, grey beard, glasses. He paused. "Let him come in." That man was Mr. Richard Olamide, CEO and founder of WeTech. "Why should I hire you?" Richard asked after scanning David's certificate. David looked him in the eye and said, "Because I learn fast. I work hard, and I have nowhere else to go." Something in his voice struck a chord. Richard took a chance, and that began the adventure of the rise of a legend. David started as an office cleaner, but during lunch breaks, he watched the coders. At night, he borrowed books. Weekends, he stayed late to study online tutorials. Richard noticed. In a year, David was promoted to assistant data clerk. In 3 years, he created his first mobile app, Find Me, a location-sharing tool for families. It blew up. Richard became his mentor, his father figure. He sponsored him to study in the UK. David returned with more fire, more ideas, and soon launched his own company, DaveX Technologies. By 29, he was worth billions. He bought his own mansion in Banana Island, drove a black Maybach, and had shares in tech, oil, and logistics companies. He had it all, except love. But soon, his family came crawling back. It started with a call from Elizabeth. "My son, please, come for Christmas." Then John messaged him. "Bro, we miss you, oh. We should hang out." Even Mr. Emeka sent a video, smiling strangely and calling David, "My boy." David wanted to believe them. He wanted to believe they cared. But something in his heart said, "Test them." So he came up with a plan that would shock the entire country. He would fake his death. Now, at the church, just moments after David rose, everyone stared, frozen, shaking. David stepped forward and faced them. "You didn't love me when I was under the bridge. You didn't ask for me when I walked away with nothing. But now that you think I'm dead, you're fighting over what I worked for." He turned to Emeka. "You hated me. Now you want to wear agbada and sit at the front row of my burial." He looked at Judith. "You posted about me on Instagram while you laughed about my death in the back seat." Silence. Only his mother had tears in her eyes now. Not of grief, but something else, maybe shame. David pulled out a white envelope and dropped it on the floor. "This is what you want, right? Money?" Then he said the final words that made everyone shiver. "You buried me for cash. But guess what? The dead just came back to life." The church was still silent. David's words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one could put out. Judith stood frozen. Her phone had slipped from her hand. Her fingers trembled as she whispered, "It was just a joke. I didn't mean it." John stepped forward, trying to smile. "Bro, David, we didn't know you were alive. That's why." David raised one hand. "Stop, please. Don't insult me more than you already have." He turned to the stunned guests, many of whom had come only for photos and connections. Most of them didn't even know his middle name. David gave a short, cold laugh. It's amazing how many people came to cry over a man they never cared about when he was alive. His voice cracked, but not with sadness. With power, he stepped off the altar and slowly walked down the aisle. Cameras clicked. Someone in the back was already live streaming. David paused beside his mother. Elizabeth couldn't look at him. She gripped her purse tightly. "David, I didn't know they would." He leaned in and whispered, loud enough for her to hear, "You watched them do this to me all my life. Now you're watching again." Then he walked out of the church. Outside, a sleek black car waited. Inside it sat his lawyer and his fiancée, Benita, the only person who truly knew what today meant to him. Benita was nothing like the women who chased David for his money. She was soft-spoken, always smiling. With kind brown eyes and braids she wrapped in colorful scarves. They met at a tech conference in Nairobi. David was the keynote speaker. She was there as a volunteer usher. While everyone fought to take selfies with him, Benita offered him a bottle of water and quietly said, "Please drink. You've been talking too long. You'll lose your voice." That was all it took. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. From that moment, David couldn't stop thinking about her. They became friends, then lovers, then partners. She stood beside him during the planning of the fake funeral, worried but supportive. "If you do this," she'd said, "you may never speak to them again." David nodded. "Good. Maybe that's what I need to finally be free." Inside the mansion, David sat in his living room, surrounded by silence. His staff had all been sent home. Only Benita remained, sitting cross-legged on the couch, watching him. He looked tired not from the act of pretending to be dead, but from the weight of living without love. "They didn't even hesitate," he said. "They didn't cry. They didn't ask how or why. Just straight to inheritance." Benita reached out and held his hand. "It's their loss," she whispered. "Not yours." David pulled out his phone. Over 50 missed calls. John, Judith, Elizabeth, even Emeka. He scrolled past them all and opened a voice recording. Emeka's voice. "That fool. At least now we can get what he left behind. If the lawyer acts stubborn, we'll sue. Or pay him off. I've waited long enough." David saved the recording and emailed it to his lawyer. 3 days later, Emeka and the rest of the family were summoned to the office of David's lawyer, Mr. Amos. They ignorantly thought it was to claim the will. They wore fine clothes. Judith came in heels too high for comfort. John wore sunglasses indoors. Elizabeth came, too. Quiet again. Mr. Amos stood behind his desk with a neutral expression. "I received your messages, many of them. But before we begin, I want you all to listen to something." He pressed play. Emeka's voice filled the room. It was a recording of all the negative things he said amidst the news of David's death. Silence. Judith gasped. John tried to interrupt. "That was just banter. Dad didn't mean it." David's voice suddenly echoed from the doorway. "You can stop pretending." They all turned. He was standing there, alive and very real. Elizabeth clutched her chest. Mr. Amos sighed. "I believe you all understand what this means. David is alive. There is no inheritance. There is no death certificate. There is no claim." Judith stepped forward, tears suddenly appearing. "David, please. We were confused. We didn't know how to react. We were hurt." David stared at her. His voice was steady. "You weren't hurt. You were hungry. For my money." John tried to hug him, but David stepped back. "You people buried me before I died. That says everything." That night, David called his mother privately. He didn't want to, but somewhere in his heart, he hoped just maybe she'd explain. She picked up on the first ring. "David, why didn't you stop him? Even once?" There was a pause. "I didn't know how," she said weakly. David's voice shook. "You were my only hope. My only parent left." Elizabeth began to cry. "I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't know he hated you that much." David closed his eyes. "You knew. You just didn't care enough to fight." Then, silence. And then David said, "I'm sending you something monthly. Don't call me again." He hung up. The new chapter begins. The next morning, David and Benita went to a private beach. There, he got down on one knee and said, "Will you help me start a new family? One that's real?" Benita cried and said yes. They got married quietly, with no one from David's old life present. No Emeka. No John. No Judith. Not even Elizabeth was there. Just love and peace. But peace didn't last forever. 2 years later, David was sitting in his home office when a brown envelope arrived. Inside it was a photo of his 4-year-old son, Joel, taken from outside their school. The note read, "You cut us off. Now we're cutting back in. You owe us." David's hands began to shake. His enemies weren't finished, and they were family. David's fingers trembled as he held the photo. His son, Joel, smiling outside his school, gate clutching his backpack with cartoon stickers on it. But behind Joel, barely visible, was a black car. Tinted windows, unfamiliar plates. The message with the photo was short and sharp. "You cut us off. Now we're cutting back in. You owe us." David gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. He didn't need to guess who sent it. He knew. It was Emeka. This is because 3 weeks earlier, Emeka stood in a half-finished compound in Enugu, frustrated and bitter. His plan to access David's wealth had failed. His name wasn't on any will. David had publicly exposed them, and his business associates now avoided the Emeka family name like a plague. John was back to borrowing money. Judith's influencer dreams had dried up. They were angry. But Emeka was dangerous. "This boy thinks he's smart," he growled, tearing a check in half. "He forgets we raised him. He owes us his life." "He doesn't owe us anything," Elizabeth murmured from a corner of the room, arms crossed. Her face was thinner now, sadness growing where pride used to live. Emeka ignored her. He picked up his phone. "I know people in Lagos," he said. "They'll follow that boy's family. One photo, one scare. He'll beg us to forgive him." In David's mansion in Lagos, Benita walked in and found David staring at the photo again. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. "What is that?" she asked softly. David quickly hid it behind his back. "Nothing," he said. "David," she pressed, her voice firm. "Talk to me. Is something wrong with Joel?" David hesitated. He didn't want to drag her into this. Not again. But he couldn't lie. Not to her. He handed her the envelope. Benita read the note. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the nearest chair, hand over her mouth. "Are they watching him?" David nodded. "Yes. And it means they're close." Benita stared at the photo again, then at her husband. "They said if you cut them off, they'd cut back in," she whispered. David's jaw clenched. "I'll cut them off for good this time." The next morning, David met with his private security team. He doubled the security at Joel's school, assigned a full-time guard to follow the child. Cameras were placed around the house, and new digital locks were installed. Benita hated it. "This isn't a home anymore," she said. "It's a prison." "I won't let them near our children," David said. Not after everything. But no matter how secure he made the house, he couldn't stop the pain in his chest. It was happening again. Family becoming enemies. And this time, they weren't just after him. One rainy night, David's phone rang. The number was unknown. He answered it. "Hello?" A deep voice replied. "You thought faking your death made you powerful. But now you've created ghosts you can't bury." David's breath caught. "Who is this?" "You'll see us soon." Then he cuts the call. David called his head of security immediately. "Any sightings around the house? The kids?" "No, sir, but we're watching." David didn't sleep that night. Meanwhile, in a cheap hotel in Surulere, John, Judith, and Emeka were arguing. "He's not responding to the photo," Judith shouted. "We're wasting time." Emeka lit a cigarette and blew the smoke lazily. "He's too proud, but wait. He'll soon feel it." John looked nervous. "Are you sure this is safe? We can get arrested." Emeka shot him a glare. "Do you want to go back to living in poverty? To borrowing money like a beggar? This is our chance. That boy owes me. I raised him." Judith scoffed. "You tortured him. Don't lie to yourself." Emeka grabbed her by the wrist. "Watch your mouth." Elizabeth, standing quietly in the doorway, finally spoke. "I'm leaving." Everyone turned. "What do you mean?" Judith asked. "I'm going back to the village. This isn't right anymore." Emeka laughed. "Go then. You were never useful anyway." But Elizabeth didn't flinch. She looked at the 3 of the Monts, her family, and saw only strangers. "I should have protected him," she whispered. And then she left. 2 days later, Benita went to pick Joel from school. The security man, Tunde, walked beside her as always. But something felt strange. The teachers looked nervous. "Mrs. Johnson?" one teacher called. "Yes?" A man came here earlier today. He said he was Joel's uncle. He said he was authorized to pick him up." Benita froze. "What?" The teacher quickly added, "But we refused." Because we have your clear instructions. We told him to leave. He was angry. He said, "Tell David he's bringing this on himself." Benita felt dizzy. She grabbed Joel tighter and rushed to the car. David nearly broke the glass table when Benita told him what happened. They went to his school. They pretended to be family. They were going to take our son. David stood up, furious. "This ends now." Benita touched his arm. "What will you do?" David didn't answer. He walked to his study, locked the door, and made a call. "Get me the head of DSS. I need full surveillance. I need every person following me tracked. I need legal warrants. And I want every one of them on watch." He paused. "And if they try to come near my son again, I'll press charges for attempted abduction." The man on the other end replied, "Understood, Mr. Johnson, but be careful. Family is the hardest enemy to destroy." 3 days later, at 2:18 a.m., a silent alarm went off in David's mansion. The guards rushed in with flashlights. Nothing at the front, nothing at the back, but inside Joel's playroom, the window was wide open. And on the floor lay a toy that Joel never owned, a small stuffed monkey wearing sunglasses. Tucked under its arm was a note. "Next time, we won't miss." David held the note, his face pale. Benita rushed in. "What happened?" He turned to her slowly. They were in the house. The air in David's mansion was tense. After the break-in, every corner was searched. The guards reviewed the security footage. One blurry shadow, one quick movement through Joel's playroom. Then, nothing. David held the stuffed monkey in one hand and the note in the other. His eyes burned not with fear, but with rage. "They crossed the line," he said. Benita stood behind him, hugging Joel tightly. "I'm scared," she whispered. David looked her in the eye. "You won't have to be much longer." The next morning, David met with the director of DSS, Department of State Services. He handed over the note, the footage, and all the past messages. "I want full surveillance," he said. "Track their phones, tap their calls. If they so much as breathe in the direction of my son again, I want cuffs on their wrists." The director agreed. 3 undercover agents were planted at Joel's school. Another 2 trailed every known associate of Emeka and John. Then David did something dangerous but smart. He sent $50 million to Emeka's old account. A message attached said, "Let's meet. I'm done fighting." Emeka couldn't hide his excitement. He called John and Judith immediately. "He's breaking. The boy is finally coming back." They set the meeting at an old hotel in Ikeja. What they didn't know was that every inch of that hotel was wired. Hidden cameras, mic'd-up agents, everything. David arrived with a briefcase. "I'm not here to fight," he said as Emeka opened his arms for a fake hug. John and Judith were already discussing how to invest the money for him. Then there comes, bang, bang, bang. Doors burst open. "Tess, nobody move." Emeka tried to run. A taser dropped him to the floor. Judith screamed. John wet himself. Within seconds, the 3 of them were handcuffed, their phones seized. They were charged. The evidence was clear. Attempted child abduction, home invasion, harassment, extortion. David stood and watched as the people who once tortured him were led away like criminals. No, not like. They were criminals. Judith begged. John cried. Emeka cursed and spat. But David didn't say a word. He only turned and walked away. That night, David stood in his study alone. He should have felt peace. But something was still missing. He opened his drawer and pulled out an old family photo with his mother holding him at age 6. Back when love still lived in her arms. He whispered, "Where are you, Mum?" Then, he remembered, 3 months earlier, at the lawyer's office, Mr. Amos had said something. "Your mother left their house the same week you exposed them. No one knows where she went, but she asked for your village address." David's eyes widened. He pulled out his phone and called his private investigator. "Find my mother. Please. Now." 2 days later, at a mud hut in Ogidi village, David stepped out of the SUV wearing a simple white shirt and trousers. The village was quiet. Birds chirped. A woman fetched water from a clay pot near a small hut with rusted zinc roofing. Then she turned. It was Elizabeth, his mother, older, thinner, but still his mother. She dropped her bucket and froze. David took a shaky step forward. "Mum!" Tears filled her eyes. She ran toward him, arms wide open. He met her halfway, and they hugged tightly, years of silence melting into one moment. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I left them because of you. I couldn't stay in that house after everything. I just wanted peace." David choked on his tears. "I thought you chose them." She shook her head, pulling him close. "I chose you." They sat under the mango tree beside her hut. David handed her the bundle of envelopes he had sent over the years, money transfers, care packages. "I thought this was all you wanted." Elizabeth smiled through tears. "I gave all of it away, to the church, to orphan kids, to the poor, because it's not what I wanted." She held his hand tightly. "All I ever wanted was my son." David looked at her and nodded slowly. "Then come home, Mum." 2 weeks later, Elizabeth Johnson moved into David's mansion. Benita welcomed her with open arms. Joel called her Grandma before the end of the day. For the first time in his life, David had a real family. Not a perfect one, but a real one. At night, he stood on the balcony, holding Benita's hand, watching Joel and his siblings play in the garden. His mother sat close by, smiling gently. David closed his eyes and whispered, "I died and came back. But this time, I came back whole."